Ladies and gents, I thought it'd be appropriate to do an additional piece on water safety, sea safety. Bit of a generic topic, an essential topic, key part of the basic helm coaching courses. But I just want to go into a bit of more detail on some points that I think are quite useful. I call them my 10 golden nuggets. It's a bit of a personal view, but it's one of those things that has grown up over time and developed over time. And I think they're all essential things that you need to at least know about and have an opinion about. And then you can either decide to incorporate them into your padding location or not, as the case may be. Now, I like health and safety. That doesn't make me a health and safety nerd. That just means I like to keep people healthy and safe when they're out on the water. I think it's important to be risk aware and not risk averse. Risk averse means don't go out at all. And whilst we do say, if in doubt, don't go out, I'm all into having a good time on the water. But part of that good time is built into safety and experience, and your appetite for risk and your understanding of risk can make people have, if you're serious about safety, people can have serious fun on the water. That's where I'm going with it. Let me share a screen with you and we'll just talk you through the key parts to it. I call this water sea safety. Just wait for it to load up. It came about, I was working in Cyprus trying to help them out with water and sea safety considerations and wrote a PowerPoint for them. And this is basically expanded from that. So here we go. Water sea safety, a personal view of considerations, but I say they're quite generic. Aim and some questions. Does safety matter? Well, hopefully it does, but it's amazing when you go to different locations around the world where people's appetite for risk is either all-encompassing, all-incorporating, or they might actually ignore it completely and hope it goes away. So whose responsibility is it? Well, yes, you're the boat captain if you're a helm or the coach, but safety is everybody's responsibility. That's fairly obvious to me and probably obvious to you as well. I'm going to introduce in this little presentation and describe what I call my 10 golden nuggets. There are others as well, but these are the ones that really I think are the standout points. And it really asks a question. So this presentation asks hopefully a number of questions and hopefully asks as many or poses as many questions as it answers. And that's the point of it. Do you have or do you need a club safety officer to take responsibility for ensuring standards are met? Do you have standards? And I won't necessarily talk about this, but when I did it for Cyprus, I was talking about a planned coastal dragon boat trip for regular club paddlers. So basically what you do is if you're going through this as a little exercise as a club, then you might sort of plan or envisage having some sort of trip and decide whether these 10 golden nuggets applied to the trip you're planning. So that's how I'd particularly use that. Policies, procedures, protocols. Do you have any? You may do, you may not. You may or may not be an IDBF, International Dragon Boat Federation affiliated country, but the IDBF have some pretty good water safety documents. They're based on the British Dragon Boat Association originals, the protocols from 30 or so years ago, and they have stood the test of time. So it's well worth having a read, even if you're not IDBF affiliated or if you're planning to be IDBF affiliated at some stage in the future. This is a good baseline to start with. Some of the BDA protocols, some of the water safety protocols in the UK, not derived from, but certainly were informed by the Lyme Bay tragedy accident, 1993, 30 years ago, where a number of people took part in a youth activity, paddling activity off the south coast of England. And unfortunately, a number of people lost their lives. As I understand it, some procedures were followed, or the existing accepted procedures were followed, but were found wanting. And that's probably a bit of a take-home point, because despite your best efforts, there's always some additional risk. So you're talking about risk mitigation, risk reduction, rather than total risk negation, which is probably going to be impossible. So you may have some overarching strategies, policies like the IDBF stuff. It's not going to cover every eventuality, and you might have some local paddling policies. This one I wrote for Cyprus paddling, their safe paddling policy, and I just extracted from that and wrote it out for a particular club called Raging, or the Pink Mouflons. They got a pink section, Cyprus Mouflons, and that really covers likely risks and how you can address certain things. It covers all sorts of paddling, from paddle boards to outriggers to dragon boats. just my particular take to assist a particular location. So you might have some local policies, and if you've got local policies, hopefully it's not a dusty old tome that never gets looked at. It's a policy that gets looked at and reviewed, and the last review date, those sort of things. So you keep the thing current. And is there an audit trail? Do you have any records? Those sort of things. So really, the first protocol, the first step would be to see what you've got in existence at the moment and modify it, adapt it, adopt it, adapt it to your particular requirements, both of those. So what is a coach? What is a boat captain? So obviously those people working with me, you may well be on a basic helm course, a boat captain course, which is the boat helm plus some additional safety navigation stuff, a more aware boat helm, if you like. And the IDBF have a number of standards in terms of coaching skills, coaching qualifications. We say on the basic helm course and the boat captain's course that actually the helm is not a coaching qualification, but it is a step, first step on the continuum, if you like, first step on the ladder, and it does give somebody a unique position. And when we're working with helms, well, I always say on all the courses you may have a helm and a coach on board, and if I'm say coaching and I'm not steering at the same time, helm and steerer being the same person. You know, if we're out on the river, out on the sea, out on wherever we are, and I'm talking my coaching talk, blah blah blah, and then something happens and the helm, boat captain, steerer pipes up, we all shut up and listen to the boat captain or the steerer, because they're responsible for boat safety. Everyone has a responsibility in relation to boat safety, but their principal job there is to steer the boat, take people out, show them a good time, take them back safely. And the coach may be focused on a particular aspect of a technical drill and may not be having an all-round observation at that particular time. So hence these two work in partnership. Obviously it may be the same person depending on the configuration of the session, but just touching on what the particular coaching levels are. Level 1, foundation coach, that's assistant coach, and you can see they're responsible for basic introduction of the sport, teaching young people basic techniques, introducing new skills, as you see here, and they might take part in charity style dragon boat events under the supervision of a level 2, and that's a key part there. So they're assistant coaches who work under the supervision and to the level 2 club coaches existing or written plan. Level 2, participation coach, that's a club coach responsible for skills development and coaching for what's called a committed dragon boat enthusiasts, as opposed to one-time come and try it sort of sessions. These are for really established clubs who train regularly. It's a general coaching award for the sport, and these people can run training sessions and be the person in charge and responsible at various outdoor activities, centres, club training, that sort of thing. There are level 3 and level 4 coaches. Level 3 tends to be the national level qualification, national squad level, and level 4 is the international performance coach. So level 3 is like the national performance coach. Level 4 is the international performance coach, just to describe what they are. So getting on to the 10 golden nuggets, as I call them. I'll walk through them in no particular order. They're all important as far as I'm concerned, and there may be other things that you're aware of that are particularly pertinent or important in your particular location. So it's my start of a 10, if you like. First one, we probably talked about this on the course. Not sure why this lady's wearing a string of pearls in the sea, but that's neither here or there. Cold water shock. So cold water shock tends to occur, so I'm told, in under 15 degrees centigrade. Now that depends on the age, the infirmity, the condition of the person, the size of the person. And I tend to not ignore the cold side of things, but just talk about water shock. And what is shock? Somebody once told me a long time ago, shock is the clinical state of circulatory collapse that leads to the reduction in function of vital organs. What does that mean? You get into a shock situation, whether it's induced by cold or whatever, and your body I'm not saying your body certainly doesn't shut down, but it does go into survival mode and it focuses on the vital bodily functions. So you might find if you're in the sea and you're, say, in cold water shock, it is cold, then you might find not your limbs might start shutting down, but they may be less effective. So these people who say, well, I don't need to wear a buoyancy aid and I don't need to worry about this stuff because I'm a good swimmer. Well, that's okay until the rubber hits the road. And it's like Mike Tyson's famous quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So in dragon boating, everyone's got a plan until they end up in some very cold water, upside down, close to a dragon boat. And then to a certain extent, everything not goes out the window. But I do say to people that when you mix intelligent people with water, cold or otherwise, the first thing they forget is everything you just told them. Something they very frequently forget is a numbering system that we'll talk about when we come on to talking about capsize and capsize prevention. So just be aware of that. In a shock sort of situation, people tend to close down a little bit, bodily, maybe psychologically as well, and they go into survival mode and get very focused on what they're doing as opposed to what they may be supposed to be doing as a club or a team activity. So that's what I was thinking about. So clinical state of circulatory collapse, thinking about the vital bodily functions, and they're in survival mode. So thinking about their own particular requirements. But as we said on the course, survival mode might actually kill you. If you think about shock reactions, somebody comes up behind you and they shock you, what you do, sharp intake of breath. Now that's not really good if you happen to be half submerged in water. And that's how come people end up occasionally, unfortunately, drowning in a very shallow amount or very small amount of water. So just be aware of that. Just moving on from the cold water shock side of things or the water shock side of things, this is the guidance the Royal National Lifeboat Institution in the UK give out. Float for your life. If you fall into the water, fight your instinct to swim until the cold water shock passes or the water shock passes. A couple of seconds, just to sort of, even though you don't want to be there, you don't want to be in the water, you're very uncomfortable, avoid that natural panic reaction, just to sort of calm yourself, think of what's going on, get orientated, listen for the next command if you've got a boat captain shouting at you at that particular point in time. So that's why I talk about, and we'll cover it in more detail, that your action on entering the water in an involuntary way is stay with your buddy, stay with the boat, float, acclimatise to the water, listen for the next command. And that float, acclimatise to the water, is extracted directly from this particular instruction from the Lifeboat Institution in the UK. Great advice. Be foolish not to follow it. So nugget number 2, buoyancy aids. Now, I appreciate this is a bit of a chewy topic for some people. Some people like wearing them. Some people don't like wearing them. Some people think they're too good as a paddler to wear them. They can swim, this, that, and the other. Nonsense. I always wear a buoyancy aid. It tends to be a belt buoyancy aid. In the UK, for some reason, I think people misinterpret the regulations. So today, when I'm recording this, it's the 29th of October, 2023, and the clocks have just gone forward. And amazingly, at this time of year, when the clocks go back, everybody in the UK dragon boating suddenly becomes buoyant and they start wearing the buoyancy aid. And when the clocks go back, clocks go forward in the springtime, they suddenly become buoyant. So it's amazing. So they don't wear the buoyancy aid anymore. What should actually happen is they should have done capsize drill and they should have done a swimming test. And then if they completed all those things, then they're not required to wear their buoyancy aids. But sometimes the instructions, not just in the UK, everywhere, get a bit fudged, forgotten. And people basically wear their buoyancy aids in the UK in the winter because it keeps them warm. And that's about as far as they think about it. Anyway, that aside, what is a buoyancy aid? Well, a buoyancy aid is not a life preserver. A level 50 or type 3, they're called type 3 in the US. Level 50 basically means it gives you 5 kilos, 50 newtons of buoyancy. Now, why is that? Well, if you think about it, the average person is about 100 kilos. Sorry, not the average person, 70, 80, whatever kilos, 70, 75% of them is going to be water, tissue fluid, and stuff that is neutrally buoyant. There is some bone and sort of more solid material. Obviously, a lot of bones are hollow in the middle or not solid, certainly. And that's going to be about 5%. And the rest may be fat. that's going to be, depending on how much fat you're carrying, that's going to be positively buoyant. So actually, it's only going to be about 5%, maybe 5 kilos or so, that is actually going to be mass that needs to be assisted or overcome by a buoyancy aid. And that's how come that a buoyancy aid that gives you 50 newtons of buoyancy or 5 kilos of buoyancy is actually going to be of some assistance to you. The way you test a buoyancy aid, by the way, what you're supposed to do is take a sample of your buoyancy aids, attach it to a 5 kilo weight, and throw it in the water. And if it floats or is buoyant, then it's good. Obviously, you've got to test if it's got various any holes, rips, or tears, or the straps and that sort of stuff as well. But anyway, that's just testing buoyancy aids, not strictly what I'm talking about here in terms of this particular presentation. But buoyancy aids, they are intended for people who can swim and are competent swimmers. Near-shore rescue is likely in the near future. They are minimum bulk. Now, I say that because I tend to like sailing buoyancy aids, which have very few, very slim line. If you think about it, a lot of sailing gear on a typical sailing boat, sailing craft, they might have one pocket, that sort of thing. Canoeing buoyancy aids, for some reason, tend to have lots of pockets and straps and toggles and that sort of thing. It's something that goes along with canoeing for some particular reason. The buoyancy aid does not keep the user safe for a long period, so it's not a sort of sea survival suit. It's provides sufficient buoyancy to protect people and requires active participation, as in swimming or treading water on the part of the participant. It will not keep you buoyant head up. Okay, so it could possibly be buoyant if you've been knocked out, unconscious. You could be buoyant and be head down, which is not particularly great. Slightly different with the inflatable buoyancy aids, which are maybe also level 50 or 50 newtons. Actually, I've got my belt buoyancy aids are 70 newtons. They're still classed as level 3 because they're at least 50 newtons. So if you had a buoyancy aid that was 99 newtons, that would still be a level 50, if you know what I mean. It becomes a 100 once it's past that point. So anything in excess of 50, but not up to 100, is a level 50, if you follow my drift. There are the various ISO standards, but the important point about buoyancy aid is it will not self-correct you in the water, as in sort of right you head up. Unlike the level 100, this is 100 newtons, 10 kilo if you like, buoyancy aid, type 2 in America. There's the ISO and EN standards there. They're intended for those who may have to wait for rescue, and these should, if they're constructed correctly, should self-correct you, as in correct you head up within 10 seconds, a bit more bulky to wear, not for rough conditions, intended for sheltered water again. And if you're talking about sort of long periods in the water, then you're talking about 175 to 150 rather, and there's 250s, and that's basically a sea survival suit, but very bulky, but they're intended to keep you safe, as warm as possible for a protracted period in the water. You can paddle with level 100s. They tend to be bulky because they have that big shoulder piece. And if you had somebody who was a non-swimmer, total non-swimmer, and you didn't have a safety belt and other safety provisions, then they should really be wearing a level 100 personal flotation device or a life jacket, really. Personal flotation device, PFA, PFD, and buoyancy aids are interchangeable terms for the same piece of kit. Nugget number 3, dynamic risk assessments. Now, I use things like what I call W4, a little check: wind, water, conditions, waves, and weather generally. So it's a risk assessment. A dynamic risk assessment includes a ground orientation or a launching orientation, the condition of slipways, the condition of wharves, the condition of pontoons, that sort of thing, and to a certain extent the condition of the boat, which is covered by the basic helm and the boat captain's course. But wind, water conditions, waves, and weather generally. That includes water quality as well, depending on where you happen to be paddling. Now, the point about this is dynamic risk assessments. I tend to ask people to have a look at, if they're assessing their location, a number of different sites, at least 2. But in Cyprus, and I use this as an example, you'll be aware that you work in waves, and you have two sorts of waves, lots of different sorts of waves, really. Waves created by the swell, waves created by the wind, and they could be coming from two different locations. They could be completely opposed. They could be going in the same direction. It depends on the topography. It depends on the location. There's a little icon there for wind finder. That's one I particularly use. That's fairly universal. There's other stuff. There's AccuWeather, which is fairly universal. Willy Weather, which is a fantastic site. It's available in the UK. It's an Australian site, but not available universally. XC Weather is another one, as in XC characters. That's just in the UK, and lots of other ones. But the point is, you'll have a particular site you go to that gives accurate information. Typically, the sites that have weather stations or linked to weather stations at sort of ports, airports, those sort of things. But very often, some of these sites are linked to wind and weather sports, windsurfing sites, surfing sites. And the sort of stuff that requires, even paragliding, those sort of things, that give you an accurate and a local forecast and actual conditions, not just forecast, but actual as well. And that's the good thing about Willy Weather, if you know that one, because it gives you the forecast and the actual in terms of rainfall and the wind as well. But the other thing I was talking about in terms of Cyprus and probably other certainly other locations as well, there's something called MOA, which is actually gives you a swell forecast. So in the Eastern Mediterranean, for example, then this time of year, the prevailing swell is going to be coming from the southwest. And that builds up over a considerable period. So the fact you've got a very small 10, that's a southwest swell, and the fact you've got an offshore wind of about 10 kph going from the east in the afternoon is not going to do much to the swell, but it's going to give you another little local variation. So having a look at two different sites, giving you two different parts of the location, if you're going out surfing or riding waves and that sort of stuff, you're going to get the swell and you're going to get the wind from a slightly different location. And you can take account of that and plan accordingly. And of course, I think something also I mentioned on courses is some of the places, some of the bays I paddle in Cyprus, you may have and if you've got a west wind or southwest wind, then you get wind in the bay. If it just switches just slightly to the west or north of west, you end up with a considerable wind shadow area because these bays are backed up by reasonably high cliffs. So those sort of local variations will assist you and guide you as well. Just a little case study. Latchi is in the north of Cyprus. It's not northern Cyprus, but it's just the north of the Republic. And just an example, when I first wrote this, a given date, it's actually in 2020, 1400 hours Latchi. The weather forecast from Windfinder said it was a southeast wind, 8 kph, but the actual swell when you got to Latchi was 2.2 meters from the northeast. So the conditions there were very much different to what Windfinder, for example, would have suggested. But just like I say, because that was more exposed to the northeast and the swell happened to be coming from that direction at that time of year. So like I say, bottom line is do your various assessments, but then Mark 1 eyeball, what I call Mark 1 eyeball, getting down there, having a look, getting to know the local conditions and how a given forecast plays out for a given location will give you a multitude of other clues and information on whether to go out, and if to go out, what areas to avoid, what areas to go and spend time in. So you know what I mean. So you get your information from a multitude of sources, but also trust your own instinct, experience, and observations as well as those from people like local fishermen, harbour masters, and people who know and understand how the water operates and the wind operates and the weather operates in that particular location. Okay. This is the example I was talking about. This is now Paphos, which is sort of more Western Cyprus, Windfinder versus MOA, which is the swell report. And once again, February 2020. 1 knot obviously is 1.85 kph, 1.51 miles per hour. And there you had a reasonable sized swell coming in from the southwest on the west coast. And Windfinder had a 15 knot, 20 knot gusts from east southeast. So like I say, knowledge of those different locations in terms of the swell report and the wind report will tell you either go, don't go. And once again, the decision to go out depends on not just the conditions, but also the competence, experience of the crew, etc. Nugget number 4, essential sea safety equipment. What is essential sea safety equipment? Do you take out a VHF mobile phone? VHFs tend to be line of sight, but of course the other thing is if you're on a VHF on the emergency channel, which is international channel 16, then if you run into difficulty, then rescue might come from a vessel nearby who happens to be monitoring channel 16. If you're using the mobile phone, then you need to have a mobile phone signal, etc., etc. Those numbers there, 1441, that's just the air sea rescue number. In Cyprus, there'll be something in your location. And 112 is equivalent of 999, so that's the emergency services, and that links to the local Coast Guard and the Marine Police in Cyprus's case as well. Do you have a plan? Do you have a crew list? If you're paddling on the sea some distance rather than some distance offshore, does somebody know where you are? I say that because in the UK, then the Royal Yachting Association, RYA, have something called safe tracks. Other locations will have something similar, where you have the opportunity to plan and plot your route, and it tracks you. It's very heavy on the mobile phone battery, but it will track you every 10 minutes continuously, every 5 minutes, whatever it might be, and actually it will notify people if you don't turn up, if you're supposed to turn up. In fact, when you take part in certain races now, then using RYA safe tracks is a requirement in some cases. Do you carry a whistle? When I teach basic helms, steers people, boat captains, I'd say a whistle is an essential piece of equipment, because a whistle blasts will carry much further than voice in many cases, and will work when your mobile phone and all your other safety equipment goes down because it's run out of battery. Do you carry a flare? Do you carry smoke? Now, some of these could be quite large, some of these can be quite small, and certainly handheld. Obviously got a flare, maybe smoke one side, a flare the other side. If you're paddling in the sea, might be worth thinking about that. Obviously keep it in a nice waterproof dry bag or some such sort of a container. Bear in mind, flares do have an expiry date, so they need replacing. They won't last forever. Do you have a tow line? Do you need a tow line? Ropes and bailers, are they in good working order? Do the bailers fit? Do we have the two types of bailers that we talk about? The big bailers may be attached either by rope or Velcro to a fixed point in the boat. So if the boat goes over, capsized or swamped, the bailer is not going to float away, but it can ship or unship a significant amount of water. And you have the smaller bailers as well, and sponges that look after the small amounts of water. If you've only got a couple of small hand bailers, cup size, it can take a long time to bail a boat out. Okay, first aid kit. Do you carry a first aid kit? I tend to carry small first aid kits, just basic stuff, not sort of sucking chest wounds, nothing like that. Just basic dressings, bandages, that sort of stuff, to do immediate first aid, space blanket, that sort of thing. I know that's a moot point for some people, but I like to keep people warm if they need to be kept warm, and there you go. Spare paddles. If you're outrigger, certainly carry spare paddles. Good idea to carry a spare paddle if you're in a dragon boat anyway. And the other thing is, on some of the courses that we do, we teach paddle steering. So if very rarely a sweep or breaks, then all is not lost. You just paddle steer the boat. After all, it's a big canoe. And the key part about sea safety kit is the water skills that go along with it. So we're all having all this equipment, but you need to know how to use it and when to use it appropriately. And if you're, for example, using a VHF, I know it's not difficult, but what is the protocol and what is the formal words you use when you come up on the radio to summon assistance? Okay. Nugget number 5, crew condition. Now, you may be familiar, if you're a gym sort of person, personal trainer, with what's called the PARQ, the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. It's a Canadian idea, and it's really for new paddlers, but you could do it for your regular team members as well, especially the older ones like me, I suppose. And it's basically a series of 7 questions, and you don't store the health records yourself. basically, if people answer yes to any one of these questions, do you feel pain? Do you feel pain in your chest when you do physical activity? Has your doctor ever said that you have a heart condition? Those sort of fairly obvious things. If somebody turns up and said, I'd like to take part in dragon boating or outrigging or whatever you happen to do, and they can answer yes to one of these, then the first port of call is to say, well, go and see your doctor, go and see your physician, get medical advice and decide, and come back and see us. You're welcome to come back and see us if you get the all clear. So I've just adapted this to the water support stuff that I use when I'm doing various stuff in various locations. It's a simple physical activity readiness questionnaire. If you want a copy of this, I'll send it to you. It's a fairly straightforward thing, but it's part of your duty of care. So, do you know who's in your boat? If it's a regular team member and they're fairly fit, then you won't necessarily need this. But if it's like a first-time crew or a corporate event, maybe, then you might decide you want that additional level of safety, that additional level of responsibility that you take. And really, the purpose of the PARQ is also to share that responsibility on the participants as well. So what condition are they in? Does it matter? Do you care? Who's responsible? Who's liable? Well, you just discharge your duty of care. If somebody filled this form out and they lied about a condition, then clearly that's beyond your ability to do anything about it. You've discharged your duty of care, and it doesn't finish there, your duties of responsibility, but it does go some way to mitigate any issues that might arise. Yeah, because you're still, whether you're the boat captain or the coach, responsible for people's health, safety, and welfare. So the condition of the crew, do you have a record of that? Do you need a record of that? Regular training crew, race crew, maybe not. Moving on, staying with crew capabilities, apart from what condition they're in, how competent are they? Are they a highly competent race crew? Got some examples of some there in the pictures. What are they first timers? What sort of paddle skills do they have? What sort of maintenance of those skills? Is it a frequent training group? And like I say, that will inform what sort of weather conditions you go out in as well. So when the rivers, like in the UK, are on red, which means you shouldn't really navigate, then I'll be quite happy going out with a competent outrigger crew who are used to paddling on the sea in those sort of conditions. It's just part of risk mitigation, risk assessment. I wouldn't take out a novice crew in those sort of conditions or anything like it. And the same applies, my appetite for risk in my own boats, going out in a single, is very different to my appetite for risk with taking out a bunch of kids in a dragon boat on a first time event, or even a competent dragon boat crew. So it depends on lots of things, certainly that crew capabilities and experience. How do you define competent? Do they have any practical water safety training? How frequently do they use it? Obviously that will define how competent they are, how experienced they are. Everyone's experienced, are they? But how do you define that? If you actually set down some sort of standards, then you're going some way to not getting you out of problems, but really just, if you take the time to think about these things, then the chances are you won't get into problems in the first place. Yeah. So that's where we're going with that. Do you have trained and competent helm steerers, boat captains, etc., coaches? And that, once again, that would increase your appetite, not increase your appetite for risk, but increase your tolerance to various risks, as it depends on the experience and the competence of the crew you're going out with, and yours as well as a boat captain, helm steerer, coach. Okay, sort of ignore the left-hand picture. That's my daft take on a way to light up the night sky with a cruise missile. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But we talk on the courses about nighttime navigation. If nothing wrong, unless you've got some local bylaws or restrictions, there's nothing wrong with people paddling at night if they're allowed by local bylaws, say that in English. But make sure the boat is correctly lit. If it's over 7 meters, needs to be shown an all-round white light, normally masthead light, but in a dragon boat particularly, or outrigger, then that may just be a forward-facing light and a rearward-facing light. If it's over 7 meters, it needs to show port side light to the left and a starboard side light to the green. It could be attached to the superstructure of the boat, clearly visible, obviously above the waterline. And what I tend to do, if you think in terms of a dragon boat and a dragon boat seat, if you think about if you look at a seat sideways, then across the back of the seat, I'll tape or bungee a stick or stick, piece of dowel, piece of wood, something like that, on the extremities of the piece of wood, about 1 meter long. Then I'll put my red and green lights, so it's above the waterline, clearly visible. That's how I do it. There's other ways of doing it. I've seen smaller red and green lights actually affixed to the boat, the gunnels, but it's only going to be a short distance from the waterline. I prefer to elevate them a little bit myself. Some of these lights are going to destroy night vision for the paddlers a little bit, but I don't think it's a great idea for the helm to be having carrying lights and stuff. They've got enough to think about, and it's sometimes good for them to preserve some night vision as well. They tend to have head torches. Of course, they move around, but then just using those for fine tuning when they're moving from a mooring, coming back from a mooring, those sort of things. Okay, but nighttime navigation, if you're allowed to paddle at night, do so, but just make sure you're properly lit. The other thing is, as a stipulation, when I take people out at night, I get them to wear a buoyancy aid, and I get them to wear inherent buoyancy aids. So buoyancy aids are always buoyant as opposed to air inflated ones. And I also get them to wear a little, I've got an example here, a little bike light. You've seen the little ones, only cost a few pounds, a few euros, and you can attach them to the buoyancy aid. So if that person ends up in the water, then they're lit as well. So they part company. And actually, if they've all got small lights on, if you think about it, you end up with an all-round white light, fixed forward light, fixed rearward light, and the paddlers are lit as well. Okay, so a way of doing that. In Cyprus, I've seen some of the crews, they wear lit wristbands. That does the job. Once again, looks quite nice in the night, paddling away with your wristbands. You can see if the team is in time, in phase, and synchronized as well. Okay, swimming skills. Are these important? And do you do an annual test? I mean, the annual test stipulated is something in the region of 50 meters in light, typical paddling clothing. You also include treading water with a buoyancy aid, treading water without buoyancy aid. And if you're not sure about the value of buoyancy aids, try swimming in one and treading water in one and without one. And you soon learn that the best way to swim in a buoyancy aid is on your back, and treading water is a hell of a lot easier, especially if you're injured, if you're wearing a buoyancy aid. And bearing in mind, buoyancy aids are not just for your assistance, they're also to assist you to assist somebody else. They also keep you clean, also keep you buoyant in the water. They also keep you warm rather than clean. They also are easy to get somebody out of the water. If somebody inadvertently ends up in the water, pick them up by the buoyancy aid. So lots of reasons you'd wear a buoyancy aid apart from your own personal buoyancy. Moving on, swimming skills, floating, treading water, those sort of things. So it's not just a swimming test as such as other skills, water skills, swimming with a capsized boat, swimming with a swamped boat, if you do the capsize procedure, and swimming with or towing a casualty. That might be something that's part of a skills test. When I do these sort of things, water safety, I tend to do it as a game. So, if you just said to people, let's turn up and do water safety, you probably get a very small attendance. If you've got like a water fun day, then you can, tricking people, you can actually sort of make it into a competition thing as well. And very often I'll go out, for example, so I'll take people out in a dragon boat in the summer, in the warm weather. They jump in the water, they do some treading water for a few minutes, then do a swim, and they swim alongside the dragon boat. And they also teach them how to get into the water from the dragon boat without capsizing the boat, as in jumping off the gunnel, and also how to get back in the boat. Quite useful skills. And the accompanying safety boat is actually the dragon boat, if you know what I mean. Obviously, you don't all abandon the dragon boat. You keep some people on the boat, etc., etc. So there's lots of things you can do to make it into a fun session where people are learning as well. And most of in fact, all of the water safety I teach it as a game. Just makes it easier, makes it more interesting for you as a coach or as a helm if you're doing it as well. And just another point there at the end: BA, PFD, or life jacket. Once again, just sort of alluding back to the points I was made about the difference between the two pieces of kit. Practical first aid. Do you need practical first aid? Is it a requirement in your location, country, territory? Is it important? I'd say it's probably important to have a practical first aider of some description or a professional in the crew. Not always achievable, but like I say, if I was writing a water safety scheme for a location, then I'd probably write this in or I would write it into the various protocols, because obviously you've got yourself, if you're the helm, or the coach, and up to 21 other people in the water with you. So you need to have a basic awareness how you're going to keep people safe, keep people alive if they happen to have an issue while you're out on the water. Just even while you're just keeping people going, keeping people alive, maximising their chance of survival if you end up in an unfortunate situation and need to summon first aid assistance to your location. So what are you going to do in the meantime? Something productive, I hope. Okay, capsize and capsize prevention. How important is this? Do you do it? Some countries and territories avoid it. Let me just go through the sort of stuff I would talk about. We'll cover it in some detail on the coaching courses and the helm steering courses. What I tend to like doing is a water safety package. And like I say, the best way to deal with a capsize is not to have one. That doesn't mean ignore it. That just means there's lots of ways you can prevent it. And like I say, if a team or crew is able to put in an effective brace stroke, then that will solve the problem in the vast majority of instances. Having done a good number of capsizes in a good number of situations, mainly in training, 2 to 3, actually live capsizes, actually in the same event, not the same day, one in a dragon boat, one in an outrigger. One was purely down to water conditions because it was just too rough for the dragon boat, and the 2 outrigger capsizes I've been involved in, which are non-planned, were both by the crew messing about. Well, I say messing about, stretching in the same direction at the same time for some bizarre reason. But they were bizarre capsizes, and in fact, with the outrigger one, we got it capsized. We were 2 minutes before the start of a race, and we were floating down to the start line, and we were fairly swift. We got it rewrited and bailed and went across the start line at the correct time. So if you're fairly swift about it, you can get outriggers back on track right way up and suitably bailed to start a race. Dragon boat, different kettle of fish, different situation totally. So my experience in conducting dragon boat capsizes in a variety of conditions over a number of years has given rise to the following modified procedures, which I've just covered through here. And it must be emphasised that each capsize is likely to be a unique event. What I'm actually doing here is reading from what I wrote for the Cyprus Dragon Boat Federation. Fairly succinct, I hope. Basic principle in training is to start off with a simple scenario and build up the complexity over time. So don't just dump people in the water and say, get out of that. I do it in stages. I do a very simple, sometimes very shallow capsize, depending on the confidence of the crew, and take it up and just build the complexity as you go along. And I do it in Cyprus. The recommendations, they do it twice a year, once on fresh water because they work on what they call dams or reservoirs, and on the sea as well. But how many times you do this, if you do it, is up to you. But just have a reason for doing what you're doing. But the point of having sort of building it simplex to complex, if you like, is to build trust and confidence so people understand as they go along, and don't just do it once a year. Don't record any problems and then just make the same mistakes continuously. It must be recognised and remembered that in a life capsize, it's likely to be a hazard, incident, or event or emergency which has caused the capsize. It's the life capsize. Once the crew are in the water and the boat is capsized or swamped, the hazard, incident, event, or emergency that may have caused the capsize is still present. So you've still got to deal with that, and that may still require some remedial or preventative action to keep the crew safe. As such, capsize situations can be very dangerous, and training should be taken seriously, but it doesn't stop it being fun as well, if you know what I mean. Like I say, it should be informative and instructive. The instructor should keep or create a positive learning environment and provide constructive discussion, and provoke and provide constructive discussion. Even competent swimmers can suffer injury, water shock, cold shock, reaction, become injured in a capsize event, rendering them unable to swim. Best way to deal with capsize is not to have one. And crews who are competent in a simple brace and hold drills may well be able to prevent the full capsize. It takes sometimes even if you get a bit of water in the boat, you can have a situation where it's almost impossible to capsize the boat because of the weight of the boat. There comes a point, if you've got so much water in the boat, it becomes swamped and you can't capsize it, or it's very difficult to. It's recommended that most clubs or teams, or I would certainly recommend that they've got some form of ongoing water safety training. Highly recommended that crews wear a buoyancy aid. Some places it's obligatory, but there's some varying opinions about this. Certainly wearing BAs for the first capsize they take part in, so they can gain some competence and some experience of the benefits and some minor drawbacks in wearing buoyancy aids in capsizes. The routine that I teach: stay with your buddy, stay with the boat, float, acclimatise to the water, listen for the next command. And I also appoint a number 2. Now, that's not number 2 as in numbering the boat, but if I'm the boat captain, I would appoint a deputy, because, strange enough, the person who is most likely to get certainly a head injury in a capsize is actually the helm or the boat steerer, because there's that big steering arm, big long sweep oar, and those sort of things. Not so much the drummers. The drummers tend to, if you're carrying a drummer, tend to get they tend to fall clear of the boat, but there is a tendency on some occasions, as a boat goes over, for people to fall on top of each other a little bit, and that might render people more liable to get some sort of injuries. But like I say, because of the position of the helm, I always allocate a deputy. I say a number 2. That gets confusing using that, because then when you're numbering in the boat, the number 2 may not be number 2, if you know what I mean. So a boat captain and a deputy in the event of the boat captain being incapacitated. Stay with the buddy. Right, what does that mean? So when in the water, immediately locate your buddy, assist them, remain as a buddy pair, or buddy 3 if it's the front 2 and the drummer, or buddy 3 if it's the back 2 and the helm steerer, boat captain. Stay with the boat. Now, if you're in a buoyancy aid, obviously that's your primary means of flotation, but the capsize or a swamp dragger boat is a secondary BA. It weighs 240 kilos without any water in it, but it does float. And in fact, we've done it before, I've managed to get up to 16 people back into a swamp dragger boat, and because of the weight of the crew, it tends to sink after that. But you can get a significant number of people. Another thing I talk about when you talk about capsizes, once the boat goes over, you're not going to be hanging around in the middle of a lake or in the middle of a harbour trying to bail the boat with a dragon boat paddle, but you're always moving towards safety. So that might mean you get the boat righted, even though it's swamped, get some people on board, some other people hanging on to the side of the boat, and the boat starts moving towards a safe location. So you're not going to be wallowing around in the middle of a lake, river, harbour, whatever. You're always moving the boat towards safety. So as a principle, that's something I've adopted in the last few years. So stay with the buddy, stay with the boat. If your very expensive paddle floats away, forget about it. We'll pick it up later. And it's very easy to get sidetracked by those sort of distractions. Stay with your buddy, stay with the boat. Float, acclimatise to the water. We've talked about water shock, cold water shock. It can kill people, obviously, in extreme situations, and it can lead to a panic reaction. So that float and acclimatise is vitally important. Listen for the next command is alluding to instructions from the boat captain or the number 2 and the numbering system. And when we do the numbering systems, we'll cover this off on various courses that we cover. But when you do the numbering system, it's a question and answer. So if I was in the event of a capsize, stay with the buddy, stay with the boat, float, acclimatise, listen to the next command, I would then call out numbers. I would call question. So I'm calling out 1. What that means is, number 1, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Are you listening for the next instruction or the next command? And they answer 1. They don't answer yes, here I am, yes, I'm okay, all the rest of it. 1 is answered by 1. So that establishes communication or connection with 1. And I know they're okay. At the very least, they're listening. And if they're shouting the number back, at least they're breathing. And that's quite important to me as the boat captain. Okay. If it turned out, say, for example, that you're going through the crew and number 4 was missing. So 1, question, 1, answer, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, no answer. Carry on. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, through to the crew. Next question, where's number 4? Hopefully number 4, if you're carrying a drummer, will be with number 3 or maybe number 5, depending on the numbering system in the boat and whether you've got a drummer or not. But you see what I mean? Next question is, where is number 4? And hopefully by that stage, if they've been disorientated or zoned out, then their buddy has grabbed hold and say they're here. Yeah. So you see what I mean? Stay with the buddy, stay with the boat. That's the initial numbering aspect of it. So the full numbering system actually then just re-establishes the command of the boat captain and get things onto the next side of things, which is actually sort of getting people around the boat, getting the boat righted and starting to move it towards safety. When do you carry out numbering? Last little point, you carry out numbering before the need to use the numbers arises. So when you're going out, I've got a couple of little exercises I use for novice crews and sometimes more competent and experienced crews as well. You do a numbering after the incident in the water, and you also do the numbering system once the boat is back ashore and safe. Okay, and the crew is accounted for. Okay, so that's numbering system. I'll talk more about this on the various courses, but that's just really a recap of the basics of the capsize drill. And like I say, I don't tend to teach capsize now. I teach capsize prevention, and that includes a capsize if crews want it at the end. Okay, but I think there's lots of things you can teach people to prevent the capsize happening, and that's far more useful than actually just dumping people in the water and saying, get out of that. Okay, last few bits. That's your 10. Accountability, records, and audit trail. What's the point? Well, a principle in law, in English law, is if it didn't get recorded, if it's not recorded, it didn't happen, or it may not have happened in the way you think it did. I'm of the opinion that if you keep records, keep proper records. So if you do capsize drills, do a quick report. Doesn't have to be very lengthy about what you did, lessons learned, and then you save that as a resource. Otherwise, you keep making the same mistake twice. Yeah. And as Einstein said, if you keep doing the same things the same way, don't be surprised if you get the same result. So who keeps records? Well, your club safety officer, if you've got one. Who's responsible? Well, the club responsibility, or is it coordinated centrally by a central governing body? Probably better off as a club responsibility, I would have thought. Safety officer, who needs one? Well, everyone needs one. And like I say, if you have incidents and it's not recorded, if it comes to a legal procedure, if it's not recorded, it did not happen, or it certainly did not happen, maybe in the way you've recorded it or recounted it. To conclude, does safety matter? Yes, I think it is vitally important. I love health and safety because it keeps people healthy and safe on the water. As I said before, I'm risk aware, not risk averse. I don't mind appetite for risk, but your appetite for risk is influenced by your experience and your training, current training. Do you need a safety officer to ensure that safety standards are met? Yes, I think you do. And do you record incidents and near miss reports? Yeah, or do you forget about them? Lots of people do that. I prefer to sort of be open and honest about it. And actually, if we were doing a capsize exercise and we learned something from it particularly, I'd go as far as sharing that with other clubs as well. I may be a minority of one, but like I say, I like health and safety. Okay. That's all from me. So that's the water safety package, my 10 golden nuggets. Hopefully that's of some use to you. And we'll leave it there. Any questions you've got, come and talk to me on the rest of the course or email me tim.w.smith786@gmail.com. Always happy to hear your feedback, any comments. And if you think I need to cover other stuff, I'm happy to do that as well. But share your experience with me, and it just makes everyone else a little bit more safe on the water. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. A lot of talking by me, but probably used to that by now. Cheers.